Have you ever noticed how many characters wear some kind of mask or helmet that covers their face and hides their identity? Yeah, that's a thing. And I don't think it's totally just coincidence. It's an essential part of the Star Wars world. You're probably thinking, if you're someone who maybe is subscribed to my channel or has visited it more than once, you usually talk about books. Why aren't you talking about books? Why are you talking about Star Wars? Well, first of all, because it is almost Star Wars Day, May the 4th be with you, and so I wanted to do something for that. But then also because I don't entirely just talk about books. I talk about literary concepts and themes and symbolism and things like that that apply to stories across all types of media. And then also, I'm talking about the dystopian genre this month. And while Star Wars is not entirely a dystopian story, I'll get into that in a different video later on in the month. It does take place in a somewhat dystopian setting, and so I think it's closely linked enough to that to be relevant. In any case, all of that being said, let's talk about why characters hide their face in Star Wars. One of the first examples of this, if you watch the movies in the order that they came out, is Darth Vader. And with Darth Vader, I think it's mostly, at least in that first movie, to create an air of mystery around the character. You don't know what's behind the mask. He doesn't take it off until Return of the Jedi. And so for those very first two movies, first two in terms of when they were made, it's very mysterious as to like, who is this person? What is behind that mask? And so giving the character kind of a mysterious nature really helps, I think, to create the right mood surrounding the character. There are a couple of good examples of this in the sequel movies as well, actually. One would be Kylo Ren, who very similarly to Darth Vader, he's hiding his face with a mask. In his case, it's completely unnecessary, and he takes it off halfway through the first movie. But initially, when it's not really clear who he is, the fact that he's hiding his face kind of ups the uncertainty. Like, you don't even know if he's human at first. The same applies to Rey in the sequel movies. It's a little bit more of a subtle moment, because it's more of practical necessity that she's hiding her face, but she has like those goggles on and she has her face all covered because she's running around in the sand scavenging from a crashed spaceship and I'm assuming doesn't want to get anything in her eyes. But when she does take it all off for the first time and she's not some kind of weird alien, she's just a human girl, it's kind of an interesting moment where it's like, okay, I see who this character is for the first time. In both cases, the mask comes off much sooner than Darth Vader's, and the kind of mystery in Rey's case is not so much meant to be creepy, just as meant to be like, who is she? But in both cases, the character's identity was initially concealed, creating a mystery for the viewer. The masks and helmets that hide characters' faces can also be part of the science fiction world building. What I'm thinking of here is the Mandalorians. They have like all kinds of cultural connotations surrounding whether you take your helmet off and whatnot. And it's much more than just hiding the character's face. It's actually an integral part of the world building and of the fictional culture that they live in. Now, I'm guessing that with the character of Boba Fett, originally it probably was just, let's make this character kind of mysterious, and then the rest got added on later. But when you look at the whole picture of it, sometimes things that would seem just kind of inconsequential to the first-time viewer actually take on a lot of significance when you dig deeper into the world building. Another thing that the masks and helmets, particularly one type of helmet, do, they create disposable enemy armies. There's this whole thing in The Return of the Jedi where Luke is so conflicted about, he doesn't want to kill Darth Vader because that would mean succumbing to the dark side and whatnot. But the good guys kill stormtroopers all the time. Darth Vader, even though he is wearing a mask that hides his identity as well, by this point his identity is known and he is Luke's father, and Luke sees him as a person who was presumably once a good person because he was a Jedi. And so there's all of this conflict, whereas the stormtroopers, they remain completely anonymous, and therefore that conflict doesn't exist. Now, that's a storytelling technique. In the real world, whether you know someone's identity or not doesn't make them more or less human. But for, storytelling purposes, it makes the viewer not really care. Which leads up to a really interesting moment in The Force Awakens, where one of the stormtroopers ends up with a bloody handprint on his mask that then singles him out from the others, makes him unique, makes it easy for the viewer to follow him and see that, oh, he's not quite behaving like the others either. And then he takes the helmet off. And that, of course, would be Finn, who goes on to be one of the main heroic characters of the sequel trilogy. But that moment when he takes the helmet off and you see his face and you see, oh, he's human and he looks troubled and conflicted, and then all of a sudden he's doing things that are totally out of character for just an anonymous stormtrooper. And then he gets a name and he gets a personality. And one of the first steps in all of that is that the helmet comes off and you see his face. It would be a lot harder to sympathize with a protagonist whose face you don't see, but actually the Mandalorian TV show does that really well. You rarely see the main character's face. He's wearing his helmet, he's wearing his full Mandalorian armor. But still, his personality and his relationship with the child, Baby Yoda, as he's typically known, that still comes across very strongly. So in that case, it's kind of like working around the fact that the main character's face is concealed to still create a compelling lead character. I can't imagine that that was easy, though. And then I also wanted to mention that literal masks or helmets are not the only way that characters in Star Wars hide their identity. There are also characters that just hide in plain sight, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who for years calls himself Ben Kenobi and presents himself as just an ordinary guy living on Tatooine to kind of watch over Luke Skywalker as he grows up. It's not until R2-D2 shows up that his actual identity is revealed. So even though he wasn't doing anything to physically disguise his appearance or hide his face, just hiding his name was enough to hide his identity. Yoda's introduction is actually very similar, where he pretends to know Master Yoda and offers to take Luke to him, and it's not revealed for quite a while, but he actually is Yoda. Now it's just kind of accepted that Yoda is this little 3-foot-tall, goofy-looking alien, and he's one of the more iconic and recognizable characters, but I would imagine that watching it the first time not knowing who he is, which I did not have the privilege of doing, I knew what Yoda looked like way before I ever watched Star Wars, but I would imagine that if it was your first time watching and you didn't know who Yoda was, that it would be a little bit of a surprise that this goofy creature actually turns out to be the renowned Jedi Master that Luke was sent to find. And then there's also the case of Padme and her handmaidens. They all look basically exactly like her. So they change places as far as who is portraying themselves as the queen. The one who, wears all the makeup and the hairdo and the dress and everything and speaks as the queen. There's a moment in The Phantom Menace when the character who is disguised as Padme is really not doing a good job, and the real Padme all of a sudden reveals her true identity so that she can continue the negotiations as herself. But for the most part, you really can't tell who the real queen is. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that the Darth Vader mask, which I started with, shows up in every single trilogy. It shows up at the end of the prequel trilogy when Anakin Skywalker fully becomes Darth Vader and has, the suit and the mask and everything. And then it shows up, obviously, throughout the original trilogy, and then in the sequel trilogy, Kylo Ren has it. And he has it, on this pedestal, and it's halfway destroyed, but he, is talking to it, and he's saying that he is going to finish what his grandfather started and everything. I think that that's really interesting, and there's some cool symbolism going on there in terms of, it's kind of said that everything is cyclical in nature and that the dark side keeps returning in different forms. First the Sith, then the Empire, then the First Order. And then there's this family, the Skywalkers, who every single generation gets involved in whatever huge conflict is going on at the time. So I think that the mask showing up at the end of the prequels, throughout the original trilogy, and in the sequels, that kind of, I think, symbolizes the recurring nature of the dark side taking on different forms throughout time, but following this one family around throughout the ages. And also in the sequels kind of represents the idea of legacy, and then that kind of raises the question of what is Darth Vader's legacy and how does his grandson see it, and the helmet that went on when he became Darth Vader and came off at the end, that coming back and his grandson just venerating it. I don't know, I think that's kind of interesting. In any case, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you liked this and you would like to see more from me, feel free to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday. May the 4th be with you.